Chapter 81. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Today's Tiandao Golden List is giving us so little. Just a green mountain and a Taoist temple, and nothing outside that temple has been shown. So, even for a powerful dynasty, finding where this kid belongs in Kyushu is a real needle in a haystack situation. Daming, Forbidden City, Zhu Yuanzhang looked grim. He saw the terrified faces of his court and thought back to his own past. The wars had made him a refugee, always in danger. Every day was a struggle against hunger, and constantly looking over his shoulder, afraid of being caught. Even now, thinking about those days still gave Zhu Yuanzhang the shivers. Yingyun, he said softly, stroking Zhu Yunwen's head, do you think Kyushu could ever be united? That a kid in a temple wasn't much compared to the people displaced by war throughout Kyushu, but it was a snapshot of the human cost of these power grabs by the dynasties. Zhu Yunwen was too young to understand, but Zhu Di nearly jumped out of his skin. What's Dad thinking? Ming Dynasty was strong, a top-tier dynasty, but unifying the 9 provinces? That was insane. Even the mighty Zhou dynasty had tried to do it and crashed and burned. And Zhu Di thought Ming wasn't even as strong as Zhou. More importantly, 2,000 years ago, Zhou didn't face so many smart, ambitious emperors. It was mostly small fries fighting it out. These days, every major dynasty had a real mover and shaker at the top. If his dad lost it, they were all screwed. Are you brain dead? Zhu Yuanzhang scowled at Zhu Di's face and smacked him upside the head. Can't you even think? Zhu Yuanzhang was annoyed. Did Zhu Di get none of his brains? Back when he was a beggar with a broken bowl, he dreamed of being emperor. Now he was emperor. What was wrong with thinking about uniting Kyushu? Okay. I get it. Zhu Di rubbed his head and backed away, shutting his mouth. He was secretly relieved. Dad wasn't totally crazy yet. If Ming actually tried to unite Kyushu, they might not even be able to hold out. Tang Dynasty, Li Shimin's eyes widened. He started to say something, then looked up as the golden list image flickered. A few more figures had appeared. What was that? Li Shimin was stunned. Those people didn't look like refugees. Foreigners. Throughout Kyushu, countless dynasties saw the new figures and were shocked. The image showed savage-looking soldiers in weird armor, holding bloody swords, bursting into the temple. The armor wasn't like anything worn in the Kyushu dynasties, it looked like foreigners. The dynasties of the 9 provinces were always at each other's throats, but they were all descendants of the Yan and Huang emperors. They were the same race. These wild foreigners were different. They had carved out territories in Kyushu, the Turks, the Huns, Japanese pirates, and constantly raided the dynasties. Some had even built dynasties of their own. Like Yuan and Qin, were these foreigners starting wars again? Chapter 94 The Dynasty's Rage. What era is this? The anger. Kyushu was seething. Especially the countries dealing with their own invasions, not these guys again. De Qin, Zhangtai Palace. Treat outsiders as the enemy, Yingyun said coldly, his face hardening. One day, I'll drive the invaders out of De Qin for good. That he was thinking of the Huns. The Huns were nomadic raiders who hit Great Qin every year. They didn't try to take cities or land. They just burned, killed, looted, and caused chaos. The dynasties of 9 provinces had a code: don't massacre cities. Emperor Shutian's slaughter of tens of thousands of soldiers had turned the whole world against him. These foreigners were even worse. They were mostly nomadic, good at riding and fighting, and moved fast. They would raid the dynasties whenever they felt like it, leaving a trail of blood, suffering, and death. Even the best dynasties couldn't stop them. So, the dynasties racked their brains, but couldn't find a way to be rid of these foreigners for good. They weren't as strong as the dynasties. But they never built cities, just roamed the borders, making them impossible to wipe out. The dynasties had to build high walls, even the Great Wall, to keep them out. Qin did the best job. The Great Wall kept the Huns at bay, to a large extent. But none of the emperors in Kyushu were cut out for passive defense. Especially not Yingyun, who had united the world. Being on the defensive was torture. But there was no way around it. Seeing the Golden List image and the foreigners, Yingyun's blood boiled. He wanted to lead the Qin cavalry and crush them. Foreigners, seeing the invaders, Yingyun frowned. The armor was slightly different, and something felt off. Were there several kinds of foreigners? Small tribes would often band together, they'd get crushed alone. But united, they could survive. Was that what this kid was up against? Yingyun didn't really care about the dynasty wars. For the people, it was just a change of rulers. There would be some casualties, but it wouldn't be anything too serious. Kyushu was huge, death was everywhere. But these foreigners were different. They were cruel and had no morals. Yingyun agreed with Yingyun on this one thing: kill them all. If you didn't wipe out these invaders, they would just keep coming back. Until the dynasty's luck ran out. Then, a new one would rise. Enemies like that had to be eliminated. Chapter 82. You are listening at novelfull.audio. But wow, Kyushu is huge. Yingyun once sent out volunteer troops to hunt down and kill any foreign races they found in Kyushu. Even with that effort, these alien races still managed to invade many areas. Looks like we need to figure out a way to wipe out these alien races once and for all. After a pause, Yingyun frowned, an idea sparking in his mind. Meanwhile, all over Kyushu, people were getting riled up over these foreign invaders. Back to the vision, the rundown Taoist temple was about to face its first real threat. Everyone in Kyushu could see the old Taoist priest had some skills, probably around the level of a master. That kind of power was beyond the reach of regular folks. But soldiers, hardened by countless battles, weren't easily intimidated. Especially when they formed ranks. Even top-tier martial artists could be challenged, and these few foreign soldiers outside the temple might not be able to take on a grandmaster in formation, but for an injured master, practically on his deathbed? It'd be a piece of cake. As the soldiers barged in, panic spread through the Taoist temple. The citizens were terrified. Watching them advance, you could practically taste the blood in the air. If you dare come any closer, I'll kill you all. Not just as everyone was losing hope, a kid's voice rang out, echoing through the courtyard. The little Taoist boy stood up, facing the soldiers, and said each word carefully. I mean it. That everyone in Kyushu could tell the kid was scared stiff. He might be a master, but he didn't have the experience or the strength to back it up. Basically, all show and no go. Thing is, if this kid was a little older and really dedicated himself to martial arts, he'd be unstoppable. He could take on not just these soldiers, but entire platoons. But right now, anything could happen. Still, some people weren't worried. Even a weak master is still a master. How could a few puny soldiers stand a chance? Yingyun was one of them. He calmly watched the soldiers advance, not even batting an eye. He was too busy thinking, and he was starting to put the pieces together. Is this, that era? He looked up, eyes on the soldiers, sighing under his breath. Chapter 95, Alien Invasion. Yingyun's killing intent, the Wuhu uprising. The words flashed in Yingyun's head. He felt a jolt. That was a dark time. A really dark time. There were definitely foreign races in Kyushu now, but Yingyun hadn't seen anything like this when he arrived. He'd almost written it off. Kyushu's seen countless dynasties, but they couldn't all be in his memory, right? But now, thanks to the Heavenly Tao Golden List, Yingyun was starting to sweat. He couldn't be certain based on what he saw so far, but deep down, he had a feeling. This was that nightmare. Wuhu was basically a catch-all term. It meant aliens. Specifically, the 5 big tribes, the Xiongnu, Xianbei, Jia, Chang, and Di, plus a bunch of smaller ones. Historically, they popped up before the Sui dynasty and after the Wei and Qin dynasties, the end of the Qin dynasty, when everything was falling apart. They took advantage of the War of the 8 Princes, when the Qin dynasty was fractured, broke, and everyone was struggling. The military was weak, and they saw their chance to invade. Over the next century or so, these tribes set up dozens of little kingdoms, some stronger than others. The Xiongnu, Xianbei, Jia, Chang, and Di became the power players, known as the Five Hu, and a bunch of smaller tribes piled on. That was the Five Hu period. The darkest of dark ages. This wasn't just the usual dynastic squabbling. These guys were brutal. Heartless. Young women. Called Buxian sheep. Kids. Heguroten. Rioters, then and now, eat people. They call it craving meat, or two-legged sheep. Huang Chao rebelled and fed people to his troops. It's all in the history books. Some say that 50,000 young girls were used as military rations and were eaten completely in one winter, their bones piled into mountains. Tragic, horrifying, inhuman, words just couldn't capture the atrocities. Boom, that the thought lit a fire in Yingyun. He felt a surge of murderous intent, and in an instant, it blanketed the entirety of Great Qin. The whole kingdom felt colder. The sun was shining, but it felt like the dead of winter. Then, just as suddenly, Yingyun realized what he'd done. He frowned and reined it in, and just like that, Daqin was back to normal. The warm sunlight returned. The chilling air vanished like a ghost. Most people didn't even notice. Yingyun went back to playing the salted fish, eyelids drooped, but if you looked close, you could still see the fire in his eyes. These aliens, if the chance came, he'd wipe them off the map. Huh, on the other side of the kingdom, Yingyun felt the shift. He tugged at his robes, looking around, surprised. What was that? Just now, he'd felt a pang of pain, like he'd been plunged into ice. Then it was gone. He was starting to wonder if he was imagining things. I don't know. Guy Nye looked hesitant. He wasn't sure what to say. He'd felt an almost unbearable murderous intent, so strong it had practically turned into a solid. It had bent the very air around them. For a split second, Guy Nye had tasted death. It was like whatever was unleashing that killing intent could erase him from existence with a thought. Then, just as suddenly, the killing intent vanished. It was like, it never happened. He was starting to doubt himself. Was he overthinking? And why did he get the sense that the cold was coming from around the ninth prince? He glanced over at Yingyun. Could it be that the ninth prince was secretly a master? The thought flashed in his head. It made sense. He was smart as a kid. It didn't make sense that he was so lazy now. Maybe he was playing dumb. Guy Nye started to get excited. If he really was holding back, it'd be a huge win for Daqin. Chapter 83. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 9. Guy Nye almost blurted something out, but then he saw Yingyun leaning against the wall, yawning and checking out the Heavenly Tao Golden List. He just stopped, stunned. Guy Nye's mouth twitched. Nah, he thought. Forget it, hiding his incompetence. Maybe he was overthinking it. Yingyun looked so chill and relaxed. Guy Nye realized he was probably wrong. The ninth prince was just, totally incompetent. Sigh, Guy Nye gave it up. Meanwhile, the Heavenly Tao Golden List kept rolling. The little Taoist kid was facing down those alien soldiers, and they were all sneering, closing in. And when their eyes landed on the girl near the boy, their grins got even nastier. They were even starting to strip. Those alien soldiers didn't fear anyone except the dying old Taoist priest. And he was lying on the ground, looking like he was about to kick the bucket any second. This kid? They figured they were in for a real treat today. One soldier rushed forward, ready to shove the Taoist boy aside and get to the girl. But then, the kid moved. He faced the arm, thicker than his own leg, and instinctively raised his hand. Crack. The sound of bone breaking echoed. The next moment, the soldier's scream ripped through the Taoist temple. What the hell are you? Writhing in pain, fear flashed across his face and he started to tremble. It dawned on everyone that this soldier was a martial artist, with blood surging through him. He wasn't weak. Probably a small leader of these invaders or something. But now he was terrified. How could this harmless little kid be so scary? Chapter 96 Tai Bai Chi. Kill. The old Taoist priest died. Monster. Seeing the terrified soldier on the screen, everyone in Jojo felt a twinge of understanding. Most of them hated the invaders and wanted them dead, but monster really did fit the little Taoist boy. Kill him! Kill him! That the other soldiers were stunned by the scream, then they raised their weapons, roaring. They never expected a little kid to be so strong. He looked even tougher than the old Taoist priest. How was that even possible? For a moment, disbelief gripped them all. But there was no time to think. Their bloodlust exploded, and they charged the Taoist boy without hesitation. Seeing the aliens charging, the little Taoist boy panicked. He was a master, sure, but he had zero experience. Never fought anyone. The old Taoist priest just made him recite the canon, never taught him anything else. He was just a 7 or 8-year-old kid. A little precocious, maybe, but still. 5 stars shine, bright in the 5 directions. Mercury wards off disaster. What virtue brings prosperity? Fireflies dare to eliminate disasters. Tai-Bai wards off soldiers. As the little Taoist boy retreated, about to be cornered, the dying old Taoist priest took a deep breath, speaking slowly. The spirit of Tai-Bai, Qiming, Chang'an. Master of killing. Kill. With the last word, an unbelievable energy surged from the old Taoist priest. It was like the endless, murderous spirit of Tai-Bai himself. Taoist canon. Hearing the old Taoist priest's words, the little boy was stunned, and a look of resolve filled his eyes. He seemed to drift back to his days studying the canon, carefully repeating the old priest's words. At the same time, a faint light radiated from his body, not a light, but Taoist runes. All carrying a trace of killing intent. Incredible. Clang. The Tai-Bai killing spirit from the old priest echoed, combined with the boy's killing aura, it erupted with shocking intensity. Crack. The little Taoist boy barely moved, just raised his hand slightly and waved it forward. A rainbow of energy rippled out. It turned into a sword of light and slashed down. The charging soldiers froze, eyes wide, ready to curse. But their heads had already been separated from their bodies. Bang. Several thuds echoed, blood splattered across the temple courtyard. A weird scene. One strike. The soldiers were all dead. Grandmaster. Grandmaster. The first soldier stared, dumbfounded, disbelief on his face, true qi leaving the body. That was the sign of a grandmaster. But how? How could a little Taoist boy be a grandmaster? It didn't make any sense. But the shock didn't last. His head lolled, and he fell. Was he dead? The soldier's last thought, he'd died at the hands of a grandmaster. Silence. The people, numb from the war, stared at the corpses, stunned. They'd given up hope. The soldiers were the symbol of death. But now, they were all corpses in an instant. It was too much to process. Old man, are you okay? That while the people stared, the little Taoist boy fought back the nausea of his first kill, walked to the old Taoist priest, and asked carefully. The old priest was already on death's door. He'd forced out the Taoist pattern hidden in the boy to kill those foreigners. He was spent. Protect them. In his last moments, the old Taoist touched the boy's head, saying weakly. These are the townspeople, the foreigners, cough cough, survivors of the massacre. Why? Tears welled in the little boy's eyes, seeing the old priest caring for these strangers as he died. He'd never called him master. But he truly saw him as the most important person in his life. This priest had left the safety of the temple for strangers, and now. Chapter 84. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The kid couldn't wrap his head around it. He'd begged the old man countless times to stop going down the mountain. They had enough food stored up in the temple to last for years. They just needed to wait out the war. But the old Taoist was set on a different path. He hadn't stopped for a single day. Even at the very end, he was still thinking about everyone else. Why? The kid just needed to understand what the old man was doing. Healing the world. The old man saw the confusion on the kid's face. His hand, resting on the kid's head, trembled slightly. He forced a smile and said softly. You'll get it when you're older. But your master might not be around to see it. Then, the old man's eyes slowly closed. His breathing faded until there was nothing left. Master? Master, but even at the very end, the old man clung to the kid, wanting to say more, but he didn't have the strength. His hand slipped from the kid's head, falling to the ground with a soft thud. His life was over. Master? The kid broke down, sobbing like a little kid, clinging to the old man. Kid, watching him, people all over Jojo felt a pang. He really was just a kid. Chapter 97, Jojo in shock. The dark times, Jojo, dynasties across the land fell silent, watching the kid cry. He'd always been so mature, with the strength of a master. It had shocked everyone, some even called him a monster. But now, seeing him cry, they realized he was just a boy. He should have been carefree, loved and protected. But what about this kid? Every day, he woke up to ring the morning bell, then recited scriptures, day in, day out, year after year. Those scriptures were like some impossible book, even for seasoned Taoists, dense and hard to understand. Even if the kid was gifted, it was still too much for a child. And now, the old man was gone. It was a crushing blow. Jojo fell silent. Tianmen. Even here, there was quiet. Emperor Shi Tian sat on a huge rock, his back to Zaiyozi, watching the crying kid and frowning. He wanted to turn around and check on Zaiyozi, but he shook his head, silently channeling the Sacred Heart Sutra, readying himself. He knew he had to fight Zaiyozi, no matter what. Even though the kid in that vision had his strength boosted by the Daozong, it wasn't that terrifying. But Emperor Shi Tian couldn't afford to be careless. He couldn't underestimate the top 3 on the peerless list anymore. If the top 3 were this scary, how powerful were the first and second? After fighting Zaiyozi, I need to find a quiet place to live out my days. The thought crossed Emperor Shi Tian's mind. He was young again, no longer aging. What more could he ask for? So be it. Emperor Shi Tian closed his eyes again, focusing on his breath. Old man. As Emperor Shi Tian closed his eyes, Zaiyozi, propped up on the steps, a flicker of longing crossed his face. He whispered. Long time no see. He lifted his gourd, sprinkling a bit toward the sky, then continued. Even though you don't drink, I still have to toast you. Ha! You can't yell at me this time. Sky, the vision continued. The kid knew the invaders would eventually find the temple. They had to leave. Don't worry, old man. Looking at the old man's body, the kid's eyes hardened. He dragged the body to the base of the ancient bell, digging a simple grave with the invaders' weapons. After burying the old man, the kid had a few people take out the food stores. Then came the scriptures. Looking at the rows of books filled with memories, the kid felt a pang of reluctance. Even though the old man had made him memorize them, he knew he couldn't take them all. But, half a year earlier, the old man seemed to have foreseen this and had dug a secret cellar. With help, the kid carefully stored away the scriptures. Then, he looked for a way out. The villagers said the invaders controlled the mountain. There was only one way. Go up the mountain. There's a temple up there. It's usually crowded. They must have plenty of food. It should last us a while. The kid looked at everyone and spoke with a firm voice. He had never been to the temple, but he knew a little about it. Pilgrims were always coming and going, which made the kid, squatting at the Taoist temple entrance, envious. He had often thought, if those pilgrims came to his temple, how great would that be? He could get money for lots of good things. But no one even stopped for a moment at his rundown temple. Now, unable to go down the mountain, the temple was the first thing he thought of. After all, the food in his own temple was enough for him and the old man, but for hundreds of people, it wouldn't last. No one objected to the kid's plan. They had all seen him kill the invaders. That almost unmatched enemy had been taken down so easily, it shattered their usual assumptions. So, even though he looked 7 or 8 years old, no one questioned his decision. A group of people followed the kid, leaving the temple and heading toward the mountain's peak. As the scene shifted, everyone saw the landscape outside the temple for the first time, and just a glimpse shocked them. It seemed a major battle had just occurred not far from the temple, but the armor on the corpses was all different. Wasn't this a faction? There were 7 or 8 different styles of armor. The invaders who had stormed the temple had also worn slightly different armor, but no one had noticed. These people were nomadic, and their production was low, making any weapons was hard enough. Making uniform armor like the dynasties was almost impossible. Now, everyone realized the gravity of the situation. If those invaders all belonged to the same tribe, this wouldn't have happened. Were there multiple invading forces? Or had several united to invade the dynasty? Boom! Kyushu was rocked to its core. Chapter 85. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Completely blown away. The Great Sui Dynasty. Standing in the hall, Yingyun glanced up at the image in the void. A flicker of shock crossed his eyes as a realization dawned on him. Could this be that era? It hit him then, something was seriously off, the 5 barbarians' invasion of China. It was a dark age that predated the founding of the Great Sui Dynasty. His father, Yingyun, had brought that era to an end when he established the Great Sui. Could this be where the little Taoist boy is right now? Chapter 98, The Little Taoist Boy's Transformation. Wielding the Tao as a sword, dealing death, Yingyun had some knowledge of that bleak period, but after years of struggle, the Great Sui had finally driven out those foreign invaders. Was the Heavenly Tao Golden List depicting that very dark chapter of history? Yingyun wasn't the only one. Emperors across various dynasties were picking up on the unsettling signs, their faces grew grim. The scene presented by the Heavenly Tao Golden List began to unfold. A group of people, helping each other, stumbled towards the mountaintop. The recent battle must have thinned out the foreign soldiers, because they weren't encountering too many dangers along the way. Still, fear lingered. Even in the little Taoist boy, a martial arts expert, now all he could do was recite Taoist scriptures in his head, shape Taoist patterns, and try to gather his inner energy. Those very scriptures he'd once hated, only reciting under the old Taoist priest's duress, were now his only lifeline. Soon, the vision shifted. The group reached the summit and saw the temple they hoped would be their salvation, but the sight that greeted them left them stunned. The temple doors, which should have been bustling with worshippers, were shut tight. Just a swirling pile of dead leaves at the doorstep. It looked like it had been abandoned for ages. Everything seemed dead and withered, but given the wartime situation, the little Taoist boy and the others could understand. Just as they went to knock, they spotted a small sign beside the entrance: no pilgrims, no incense. Please turn back. A little wooden placard with those 2 lines, alone at the temple entrance, with the breeze swirling leaves around it, it created a feeling of emptiness and abandonment. That the little Taoist boy smirked, escaping the world, He couldn't help thinking about the old Taoist priest. The abbot could have stayed indoors and waited it all out. Nobody would even notice one shabby temple, just like the pilgrims of the past. But he'd chosen to descend the mountain. He'd saved countless lives, but not his own. Still, a sliver of hope flickered in the little Taoist boy's heart, because without this last sanctuary, he might not be able to keep his promise to the old man. He felt like a terrible person, especially since he had urged the old priest to stay put. If he had a choice, he would have closed the door and waited out the war, but he'd made a promise, and he couldn't break it. Dong! 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 The little Taoist boy walked up the steps and gently knocked on the door, the sound drawn out, yet measured. He knew the mountain's acoustics. A soft knock would echo through the whole temple. No need to rush. The sound carried through the green mountains, a lonely echo in the valley, but there was still no response from within. Given his martial arts skills, and the Taoist scriptures the old Taoist priest had guided him through, the little Taoist boy actually had the power to force the temple open. But did he really want to? He paused, troubled. The Buddhists didn't welcome guests. Should he still force his way in? Across the 9 provinces, silence fell over the major dynasties. They could understand the Buddhist sect's desire to escape the chaos. In wartime, self-preservation was key. Besides, not all Buddhist temples were like this. If it hadn't been for the old Taoist priest's previous actions, no one would have thought anything of it. Self-interest was only human nature, after all. But after what the old Taoist priest had done, this felt like bitter irony. Plus, everyone had seen the never-ending stream of pilgrims passing by the Taoist temple on their way to this mountain to pray for blessings, but the times had changed. The once happy pilgrims were now victims of war, and the temple doors were bolted shut. In the great Qin Dynasty, Buddhists retreating from the world, Taoists descending the mountain. A chill ran through Yingyun as he stared at the heavenly Tao golden list. As an emperor, he shouldn't be swayed by emotion, or show his joy or anger. But Yingyun was genuinely furious. He knew in his heart that not every Taoist in the 9 provinces had the same spirit as the old Taoist priest, not every monk was so self-serving as to hide away in a safe place. But still, his killing intent flowed. "Kid, you were right to keep monks out of Daqin." He paused, glanced at Yingyun, and said in a low voice, "If they ever get in, I'll kick them out." A lot of the strong figures on the Tiandao golden list were associated with Buddhism. Zhang Sanfeng, the sweeping monk. Right now, there were only 7 figures on the peerless list, 2 of them were Buddhist. No matter who it was, Buddhism was almost always on the wrong side. And now, it was happening again. They could excuse 1 or 2 incidents as coincidence, but what about the 3rd time? Meanwhile, the scene moved on. The little Taoist boy decided not to knock on the temple door after all. Instead, he found a spot nearby and helped everyone settle in. Then, he ventured down the mountain alone. He needed to gather information, and collect enough supplies to support hundreds of people. After all, most of those entrusted to him by the old Taoist priest were elderly or frail, and many were seriously injured. If he couldn't find medicine for them, they might not last more than a few days. Time trickled by, and months passed in the blink of an eye. Through the little Taoist boy's eyes, the people of the 9 provinces witnessed the cruelty of the foreign invaders. Corpses littered the landscape, piled into small hills. Some of the displaced people had learned to build tents and formed small groups on the mountaintop. As the little Taoist boy continued to bring back survivors from the foot of the mountain, this place grew into a small community, and the little Taoist boy turned out to be remarkably gifted. The old Taoist priest's teachings had shown him how to fight using the Daozang. His strength was growing steadily. He had reached the acquired realm. Then, the innate realm. 3rd-rate martial artist. 2nd-rate martial artist. In just a few months, the little Taoist boy had progressed dramatically, reaching the level of a 2nd-rate martial artist. His understanding of the Daozang had deepened too. Before, when he read the Daozang, he could evoke its meaning, but he hadn't felt it personally. Now, after months of hard experience, his state of mind had transformed. Chapter 86. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Edited content using the Daozang as a sword, kill. Chapter 99, 1 against 10,000. The power of Zaya, using Tao to kill the invaders. The first time the young Taoist boy killed, it was in that temple. Taibai's energy sliced the heads off several foreign soldiers. But that was mainly because the old priest guided him, inspiring him to recite the Taoist scriptures accumulated over years. Strictly speaking, it wasn't his own power. Now it's different. Just a few months, but the young Taoist has really grown. The image showed the young Taoist, clad in a blood-soaked robe, weaving through the ranks of the enemy, almost killed by a single move. It sent the invaders into a panic. Many of these soldiers, though few in number, rarely ventured out of camp, afraid of meeting their end, and the young Taoist had taken a Taoist name for himself, Zaya. Everyone knew Xiaoyao was taken from Zhuangzi's Zaya, about soaring 90,000 miles. A thought of freedom. Free. But Zaya chose the name to honor the old priest. Because when he was little, the old priest called him Xiaoyao, meaning little one. And he called the old man Old Man. Years passed, Zaya fully mastered his abilities, reaching the level of a true grandmaster. He was only 12. A 12-year-old grandmaster wasn't as mind-blowing as a 7-year-old, but it still broke the record in Kyushu. Zaya was no empty shell. He knew the Daozang inside and out, and among grandmasters, he was no pushover. Compared to Su Fu, who became a grandmaster by taking drugs, Zaya could beat at least 2 of him, and because of Zaya, the invaders didn't dare to launch large-scale offensives, settling for a slow, steady advance, grandmaster. And one who kept an eye on them, killing them whenever he got the chance. It infuriated them, but they couldn't do anything about it. They didn't understand, what had they done to offend such a powerful master? Why was he singling them out? But everyone in Jojo knew that Zayayozi was doing it for a promise. That's all. Finally, several tribes couldn't take it anymore and gathered to figure out how to eliminate the young Taoist. After all, though just one boy, he was a major headache for invaders who usually spread out and win with speed. This time, they went all in, they committed tens of thousands of cavalry, and even hired many second- and first-rate masters, plus, they spent a fortune to hire 2 grandmasters. How many grandmasters were even in the 9 provinces? Hiring one to fight was crazy expensive. But they gritted their teeth and endured it. Even if it meant risking everything. If they didn't kill Zayayozi, they were doomed. The invaders were few in number and had even fewer experts. Dispatching such a large army for one person was a huge deal. This battle shook the world. Qin Dynasty. Yang Guang took a breath, looked at the image in the sky, and mused. Looks like 100 years ago, during the darkest period. A grandmaster appeared and slaughtered countless invaders. The top leaders of the Xinbei, Jie, Di, Chang, and Xiongnu tribes were all killed. Could it be him? That time was called the 5 Hu and 16 Kingdoms period, when a dozen foreign regimes rose. But the foreign masters and leaders died inexplicably, even the leaders were often assassinated. This threw the governments into chaos, and factions fought for power. It gave others a chance to breathe. Then, uprisings erupted and new dynasties rose. Finally, the Qin Dynasty ended the war. Everyone thought the foreign masters and leaders died due to infighting, but now it seemed that wasn't the case. The war raged on the screen. Facing tens of thousands of cavalry, 2 grandmasters, countless first- and second-rate experts, Zayayozi stood alone, hands behind his back, welcoming all comers. Blood flowed from Zayayozi's body, but it wasn't his. It was the blood of the invaders. He was too strong. He could crush even a master with one move. With a wave of his hands, Tai Bai Chi flowed, and the sound of metal clashing echoed, killing thousands of cavalry. Monster! The invaders shouted a familiar name from Kyushu. They were confident, thinking that tens of thousands of cavalry could crush anything. Especially with the 2 grandmasters they'd hired at a huge cost, plus countless first- and second-rate experts. How could they not defeat a little Taoist priest? But they were wrong. After spending half their wealth, begging and pulling strings to hire the 2 grandmasters, one was gone in an instant, the other was scared stiff, trembling on the sidelines. Boys, kill. He's just one man against thousands of us. Kill. The invaders, after a brief panic, unleashed their bloodthirsty instincts. Kill. Boom. The tens of thousands of cavalry formed a battle formation and charged at Zayayozi like a tidal wave. These weren't soldiers from some weak dynasty that Emperor Shi Tian casually slaughtered at Tianmen, they were the elite of the invaders. Murderous by nature, they were now driven into a frenzy, making them even stronger. They were on par with the supreme dynasty. Kill! Kill! Their battle cries shook the sky. And their opponent was just one person. A Taoist. Zayayozi still stood with his hands behind his back, never retreating, calmly facing the charging cavalry. Then, he leaped forward. Countless people in Kyushu became solemn. Grandmasters were powerful. But fighting tens of thousands of cavalry head-on on a vast battlefield, even a grandmaster wouldn't dare to do that. Chapter 100, Becoming a Grandmaster with One Thought. Everyone was shocked. 1 against 10,000 had happened in Kyushu's history. But the strong master used terrain to his advantage, jungles, mountains, cities, maximizing the grandmaster's power. Zayayozi was facing the enemy head-on. Shocking. But their shock didn't last long. The next scene left them speechless. Zaiyozi turned into a stream of light, weaving through the thousands of cavalry as if they were nothing. Chapter 87. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You know, one soldier might not stand a chance against a master, but pack them into a tight formation, and they can trap that master, and now, these tens of thousands of cavalry would wear any master down, you'd even have masters caught in the crossfire. But for Zaiyozi, weak, a wave of his hand, and hundreds of cavalrymen drop, blood soaking the ground. Finally, Zaiyozi unleashes this insane aura, steps into the air, and heads straight for the alien leader. Snap. The leader's eyes go wide. He tries to backpedal, but his body's already twisting. His head, though, stays put, head and body, separated, just like the first time the kid killed someone. There's a hint of disbelief in the leader's eyes, then, darkness. Grand Master. Jojo's jaws drop at the sight. Everyone stunned, walking on air. That's a Grandmaster move. Before, Jojo didn't know much about Grandmasters, just that they could let their inner energy loose, turning it into all sorts of crazy attacks, but after Zaiyozi's fight with Su Fu, everyone kind of figured out that walking on air meant you were a Grandmaster, and now, Zaiyozi doing it. Doesn't that prove he's a Grandmaster? Holy crap, everyone in Jojo sucks in a breath, totally shocked, originally, learning that the kid had plowed through the Taoist canon and kind of forced his way up with the Taoist secrets inside. That wasn't that shocking. I mean, the Taoist canon's a crazy book, so you could see how someone might glimpse Grandmaster level stuff, but now, Zaiyozi sealed the canon away. How'd he break through to Grandmaster now? How's he flying? God. Can't be killed. The leader's dead. The tens of thousands of aliens in the picture. Completely freaked, walking on air. They practically see him as a god. They've never heard of any master doing that. Borrowing force, maybe, plus, their leader's dead. Panic sets in, defeat. Just like that. Boom. Aliens wheel around, bolting in every direction. They see the guy in front of them as a straight-up monster. Even their best guy couldn't touch him. What chance do they have? Zaiyozi doesn't let them get away, turning his inner energy into weapons. The sky turns blood red. If you could call it a fight before, now it's just a slaughter, complete and utter slaughter. Jojo goes silent. Again, who could have guessed that the kid who used to throw punches and argue with the old Taoist priest would become this? And so ruthless. Everyone remembers Zaiyozi trying to get Emperor Shi Tian to turn over a new leaf at Tianmen. Is this even the same guy? I mean, in that picture, Zaiyozi's moves are sharp, deadly, aiming for the kill every time. At Tianmen, he didn't have anything like that kind of killer instinct. Maybe something happened in those years. The thought crosses everyone's mind, shaking them up a little. The picture keeps rolling. Zaiyozi stands alone, alien corpses scattered around him, blood flowing everywhere, tens of thousands of cavalry. 2 Grandmasters, a bunch of first and second-rate masters, all wiped out. Casualties like that are rare even after dynastic wars. And to think, one guy did all that. After it's done, Zaiyozi steps into the air, turns his back on the world, and walks away, leaving tens of thousands of corpses in a bloody heap. Silence. Jojo, dead silent. The picture rolls on, a few years flash by. Zaiyozi's been wandering around, targeting aliens, although nothing as big as the cavalry slaughter happens again. But he takes out all the alien masters and leaders. When the first leader dies, some high-ranking aliens get ambitious, fighting for power. Then, the new leader gets assassinated. One day in office, then the third, the fourth, no one wants the top spot anymore. But even then, foreign bigwigs keep dropping dead. The alien soldiers are terrified, huddling in their tents, afraid to come out. And the worst part? No one knows what's going on. Like the Grim Reapers on the loose. Finally, the aliens start falling apart. Then, some people who were pushed around by the aliens but still had some fight in them, started to step up. Xianliang, Shiliang, Beiyan, Ranwei, and others, these small dynasties popped up all over the place. Ran Min, of King Ranwei, became famous with his kill who order. 6 barbarians inside and out, anyone claiming to be a weapon will be killed. Just like that, the tables turned. The Hu people were pushed back hard. That's when Zhaoyozi finally quit killing and went back to the Taoist temple. Old man, I kept my promise. Looking at the little mound, Zhaoyozi sits down, pulls out a bottle of booze, spills some on the ground, and whispers. Now, I'm here to see you. Years of killing have left Zhaoyozi full of dark energy, but somehow, back at the temple, all that darkness just disappears. They tore down the temple on the mountain and built a Taoist temple for me. Zhaoyozi smiles sadly. I used to envy that monk so much. Funny, real funny. Old man, I'm leaving. He talks about some old childhood stories, sighs, looks at the Taoist temple, and says, real calm. Going to Jojo. See what's out there. Chapter 101, Eternal Spring Valley. Another way to cheat death. Zhaoyozi's gone. He doesn't take the Taoist treasures, leaves them in the new temple on the mountain. People still pass by the old, ruined temple from time to time, but the pilgrims only go up to the new temple, the one that replaced the old one. They don't stop at the little ruined temple, just like before. Whoosh! The breeze picks up, scattering leaves, shaking the bell, hitting the old copper, making a crisp sound. There's just a lone grave, standing there quiet, nothing else. Chapter 88. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jojo. Zhaoyozi is barely 20, already a grandmaster. That's insane. Based on what we've seen, everyone in Jojo figures Zhaoyozi lived at least a century ago, so, he's a grandmaster before 20, what happened later? Did he keep leveling up over the next 100 years? People across Jojo were shaken, realizing they'd seriously underestimated Zhaoyozi's power. Tianmen, Emperor Shitian's face darkened, a grandmaster before 20. Su Fu felt a pang of envy. He'd busted his butt learning every martial art in Jojo and trained for ages to finally become a grandmaster, and this guy didn't even hit 20. Su Fu realized he was probably still trying to figure out how to con people back then. Ugh. Some people have all the luck. For the first time, Su Fu thought his own talent was a joke. Good thing I have phoenix blood. Makes me immortal. Su Fu took a deep breath, reminding himself he'd live forever. Even if Zhaoyozi was a prodigy, he'd max out at a few centuries. Emperor Shitian would have the last laugh. Patience. Emperor Shitian decided to simply outlive Zhaoyozi. Zhaoyozi's talent was ridiculous, but if he could just hang in there for a few hundred years, wouldn't he be number one when Zhaoyozi kicked the bucket? Besides, if Zhaoyozi got old and feeble, maybe he could actually beat him. Emperor Shitian didn't even realize it, but deep down, he already admitted Zhaoyozi was better. He just thought the phoenix blood gave him a fighting chance. Besides Su Fu, the rest of Jojo was blown away by Zhaoyozi's talent. A grandmaster at 7 was mind-blowing. This was off the charts. Grandmaster? Most people in Jojo had never even heard of that level before the Heavenly Tao Golden List. Now, someone had reached it before 20. How could that not make everyone who trained for years without even hitting first class or grandmaster feel like total failures? Some unstable folks were about to lose it. This was too much. Good thing he won't be around forever. That thought calmed everyone down a little. Zhaoyozi looked old, with white hair and a youthful face. He probably wouldn't last long. No way he'd live thousands of years like Su Fu, right? Everyone felt a bit relieved, thank goodness. Just as Jojo was secretly celebrating the end of Zhaoyozi's reign, the picture changed. Time passed. Zhaoyozi's dark energy was almost gone. He'd even swapped his gray Taoist robes for white ones, and the lotus crown in his hair gave him an ethereal vibe. Most importantly, he was a grandmaster. Just standing there commanded respect, a living immortal. People all over Jojo called him an immortal, a wise old immortal, and so on. Then one day, he came to a place, Dali. Most people in Jojo had never heard of it. It was out on the edge, considered uncivilized by many dynasties. They barely gave it a second thought, but Zayayozi was free and easy. He didn't look down on places that Jojo considered backwaters. He wandered into Dali and started exploring. Just when everyone in Jojo thought he was just sightseeing again, a deep valley appeared, the immortal Changchun Valley. Outside the valley, words were etched into an ancient stone tablet. Despite Jojo's many languages, the heavenly Tao Golden List helped everyone understand. Immortal Changchun. Everyone froze. What was this? Besides phoenix blood, was there another way to become immortal in Jojo? The emperors of many dynasties perked up. A true dragon was too hard to find. You'd need a grandmaster or an army to kill one, but a secluded valley. That was easy to locate. The heavenly Tao Golden List didn't show Zayayozi's exact route, but once they knew it was in Dali, they'd find it. Some were excited, but most were skeptical. It was just a stone tablet. After all, tons of sects and dynasties in Jojo claimed they could grant immortality, but they'd all turn to dust in the end. Most people didn't believe in this supposed immortality. The scene changed again. Zayayozi stepped into the valley, a small village. There was an isolated village deep inside. Surprising, but not unbelievable. The stone tablet hinted at human activity, but when everyone in Jojo saw the villagers, they were stunned. The villagers' clothing in the everlasting valley was similar to Jojo's, but they all shared one trait: youth. They looked too young. Grandparents, parents, and kids were chatting under the trees near the village entrance. The grandparents had fair hair and youthful faces. They looked about 30, the mother looked 17 or 18, the children were normal kids, playing and chattering. What was going on? Everyone in Kyushu was confused. This was unbelievable. Chapter 102, The World of Mortals Refines the Heart. Zayayozi Takes Action. Everlasting Changchun. Everyone remembered the words on the stone tablet. Could there really be eternal spring in this world? No wonder everyone was doubtful. 3 generations looking that young was insane. The heavenly Tao Golden List also showed other villagers nearby. They looked ridiculously young too, like the grandparents. Hard to guess their real ages. Even Zayayozi was surprised. He wasn't even 10 years old, so he didn't need to worry about living longer. But who doesn't want to live forever? Curious, Zayayozi walked over to the 3 generations of grandparents and asked seriously. The family was surprised to see an outsider, but they greeted Zayayozi warmly. From them, everyone learned the secret of the eternal spring valley. Chapter 89. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Holy Altar. In immortal Changchun Valley, they have a holy altar. Every morning, the villagers gather to pray. After that, they work from sunup to sundown. Yet, somehow, they live much longer than people on the outside. The downside? If they leave immortal Changchun Valley, they age rapidly, sometimes even dying on the spot. This phenomenon piqued the interest of everyone in Jojo, and Zayayozi was super curious too. Plus, immortal Changchun Valley seems to have a natural barrier. Zayayozi's the first outsider to get in for centuries. So, every family welcomed him with open arms, eager to hear about the outside world, and that's how Zayayozi ended up staying in the village. Time ticked by. Before he knew it, a month had flown by. During that time, Zayayozi spent his days and nights meditating in front of the altar. For a grandmaster, staying up all night and not eating or drinking for a month isn't usually a problem, but it can get old fast. But Zayayozi, sitting cross-legged in front of that altar, felt fantastic. More energetic than ever. There's gotta be something inside this altar, that the thought struck him, but he's a cultivator, not one to harm others for his own gain. And since the villagers were so good to him, Zayayozi decided against opening the altar and planned to keep meditating. This time, though, he didn't sit still for a month. Instead, he worked alongside the villagers from sunrise to sunset. He even built a little shack for himself in the corner of the village. As time went on, Zayayozi became part of the community, sometimes helping with the plowing and harvesting. Now and then, he'd venture deep into the valley to hunt and bring back meat for the villagers. Since Zayayozi knew all about the outside world, he became the go-to guy for all the kids in the village. Before long, he was a respected figure throughout the village. Jojo. Watching Zayayozi, everyone wore a look of disbelief. Who would have thought a grandmaster would end up farming like a regular Joe? And not long ago, Zayayozi was striking terror into the hearts of countless alien races. The change was so drastic, it was hard to wrap your head around it. Is he going into hiding? Looking at the scene on the screen, many in Jojo wondered the same thing. After all, everyone knew how strong Zaiyoshi was. Even if the holy altar held something special, he wouldn't just settle down there. Maybe he was just tired of fighting and wanted to retreat to the valley. But some people watched Zaiyoshi's actions with a thoughtful expression. Daqin, Zhangtai Palace. Hiding in the ordinary world. Gai Nie murmured, looking at the image above, a thoughtful look on his face, becoming one with the mortals. The thought flashed through his mind. Ever since Zaiyoshi entered immortal Changchun Valley, he'd never used his grandmaster powers. Even when he went hunting, he just used regular traps, like any other hunter. Then, using his sheer strength, he'd catch and kill his prey. He never used any of his true energy. Just imagine how terrifying a grandmaster is. If he went all out, nothing outside the valley would stand a chance. Plus, Zaiyoshi had stopped fasting. He borrowed some seeds from his neighbors, tilled a few acres of land, and started planting. He had some experience farming before, helping the villagers out. Now that he was doing it himself, it came naturally. Seeing Zaiyoshi like this, Gai Nie's mind raced, like he was seeing a whole new path. He even thought about resigning to Yingyun and going back to the fields. But the feeling was fleeting, and Gai Nie quickly regained his composure. He wasn't ready for it. Zaiyoshi was a grandmaster, covered in the blood of his enemies. By becoming a regular guy, he could get rid of the dark energy, calm his mind, and go even further. But he only had his sword. If he lived in the world and let his sword heart grow dull, he might never swing his sword again. With that, Gai Nie dismissed the idea. He almost made a big mistake. Maybe, when I've mastered the sword, I'll understand Zaiyoshi's state of mind. Watching Zaiyoshi roll up his sleeves and plant seeds in the field, Gai Nie felt a pang of emotion and whispered to himself. Just as Gai Nie was lost in thought, the heavenly Tao Golden List moved on. Before he knew it, Zaiyoshi had been in immortal Changchun Valley for over a year. During that time, he practically forgot he was a grandmaster. Every day he woke up and plunged into work, only dragging his tired body home when the sun went down. Of course, it was also the most relaxed time. Zaiyoshi had since the old Taoist priest died. Then, something strange happened. Who doesn't want to live forever? So, even though immortal Changchun Valley had been isolated for so long, it was only a matter of time before someone came looking. One day, a group of first-rate masters and two elderly grandmasters broke into the village. Their goal was simple, to find out the secret to eternal youth, especially the two grandmasters, who were getting on in years and needed to extend their lives. A fight was about to break out. Chapter 103, The Divine Book went with Xiaoyao, and only the Changchun Spring remained in this valley, immortal Changchun Valley. Even though everyone lived a long life, hardly anyone practiced martial arts. So, when the masters arrived, it was a complete massacre. No one could resist, and that's when Zaiyoshi stepped in. With just a fallen leaf, gently flicked, he created a streak of light. The two grandmasters and countless masters were instantly killed. Whoa! Seeing this, everyone in Jojo gasped and their hearts skipped a beat. Had Zaiyoshi gotten stronger in just 1 year? He'd always used the mysterious methods from the Taoist canon to fight. Powerful, sure, but still a little lacking. Now, he could kill with just a leaf. Could Su Fu, who'd been training for 2,000 years, even stand a chance against Zaiyoshi in his 20s? Everyone suddenly thought of Su Fu, also known as Emperor Shitian. Emperor Shitian's 4 tribulations of the Holy Heart were terrifying, but nothing compared to Zaiyoshi's return to nature. His state of mind alone put him in another league. For those who practice Taoism, their state of mind often dictates their power. What had Zaiyoshi been through in that year? The question bounced around in the minds of countless people. The shock in their hearts was indescribable. After killing the grandmasters, the village went back to normal, working from sunup to sundown, just like before. But Zaiyoshi could feel it. The whole village now regarded him with a mix of awe and distance. No one saw him kill with the leaves, but the whole village knew everything about him, that he was an outsider. Plus, these people weren't dumb, just reclusive. It wasn't hard to figure things out. And the villagers were simple people. The sight of corpses and blood was too much for them, so, even though they wanted to treat Zaiyoshi the same, they couldn't. The playful kids who used to bug him for stories every day were nowhere to be seen. Sharpness always reveals itself. And when it did, the ordinary villagers couldn't handle it. Chapter 90. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He couldn't avoid it. So, the thatched house on the edge of the village became off-limits. Seeing this, Zayayozi knew it was time for him to leave. He gave the farm tools he'd made to the grandparents and grandchild he'd first met when he arrived. He carefully divided the remaining supplies and food among the other villagers. Then, bag packed, Zayayozi prepared to slip away under cover of night. After a year of grounding himself, Zayayozi was unfazed by praise or blame. Leaving brought him little emotion, but passing the altar, he noticed a faint light shimmering on it and paused, intrigued. The light was coming from the altar itself. Zayayozi stopped to examine it closely. He saw the usual offerings, placed there by the villagers for worship, but underneath them, strange symbols were appearing. They were faint and blurry. Without a close look, you'd mistake them for patterns. Even with Zayayozi's deepened understanding from experiencing the mortal world, he could easily have missed them. What was this? Intrigued, Zayayozi traced the symbols on the altar, studying them. First, doubt flickered across his face, then solemnity, then finally, relief. He simply sat cross-legged and began to circulate the energy within his body. This was only the second time Zayayozi had drawn on his inner power since entering the valley. The first time was when he fought the grandmasters and countless masters of varying skill. Now, this time, throughout Jojo, everyone's attention focused on him. They were convinced that immortal Changchun Valley held secrets, maybe even immortality. But in all this time, aside from the holy altar, no one had found anything remarkable about the village. Now, seeing Zayayozi concentrating and focusing his breathing, it seemed to everyone in Jojo that he was about to uncover the secret to eternal life. Time ticked by, a pale ray of light touched the sky, and the rising sun kissed the holy altar, sending ripples across its surface. Zayayozi, who had been meditating with his eyes closed, opened them and slowly exhaled. Eternal life. He raised his head toward the holy altar and saw that the strange symbols had vanished. He stood and bowed deeply. I am grateful. Ding, star. As Zayayozi spoke, the holy altar shuddered, and a wave of light rippled across its surface, as if responding to his bow. Then, cracks appeared across the altar, and it began to crumble. The altar. It's breaking. In the distance, villagers approaching to worship the altar stopped, horror on their faces. The altar was the foundation of their survival. Its destruction would doom the village, leaving it a wasteland filled with dead bodies. Did you do this? Instantly, everyone's eyes locked on Zayayozi, their faces twisting with hostility, but remembering his power, they hesitated, surrounding him without moving closer. I mean you no harm. Zayayozi sighed, meeting their angry stares. He circulated his energy, using the technique he'd just learned to transform into an infinite mist, eternal Changchun Gong. That was the name Zayayozi gave this technique. Boom! As Zayayozi moved, the sky thundered, and endless streams of light rose against the backdrop of the morning sun. At the same moment, a pool of clear water trickled from the ruins of the altar. This is the fountain of youth. Drinking from it will have the same effect as the altar. Zayayozi glanced at the fearful villagers and sighed. But remember, don't drink too much. 1 or 2 drops each month is enough, or the consequences will be unpredictable. And once the water leaves this valley, it will lose its power. He knew arguing was pointless, so he sighed. Finally, using his finger as a pen, he etched a line on the ruins of the altar. The divine book has gone with Xiaoyao, leaving the fountain of youth. He spun around. In a flash, Zayayozi channeled his energy and streaked from the valley in a burst of light. Chapter 104, Founding a Sect, Xiaoyao. Creating the art of the North Sea, Zayayozi floated into the air outside of immortal Changchun Valley. With a wave of his hand, a misty air flowed from his fingertips toward the valley entrance. The path, already rugged, began to blur, then, it vanished before everyone's eyes. What kind of magic was that? The people of Jojo were shocked, their faces marked with undisguised fear. They couldn't imagine such a mystical trick. A formation? Some people recognized Zaiyozi's movements, setting up a barrier. Even so, it was terrifying. Plenty of strange people in Kyushu could create formations, they seized the power of the world for their own. Like the Bagua formation, 6 Ding Liujia formation, Tianmen formation, using special terrain, they could tap into the power of heaven and earth to crush their enemies. In battles for dynasties, it happened constantly. Smaller countries relied on formations to survive. But for someone like Zaiyozi to wave his hand, command the elements, and create a grand formation, it was shocking. He surpassed almost everyone in Kyushu. Hanzhong. Controlling the power of the world. Unbelievable, a figure, holding a feather fan, watched the image and sighed. Zaiyozi's skill with formations is unimaginable. Is he really that strong? His 3 companions looked shocked, one had ears that hung down to his shoulders and hands that reached past his knees. One had a beard 2 feet long and a face as red as a date, they all had a heroic aura. The man with long arms and big ears had asked the question, his name was Liu Bei. He claimed to be King Jing of Zhongshan, carved out a small kingdom in a remote part of Zhozhou, and declared himself king. You flatter me, the man with the feather fan shook his head. Only one other person I've seen can create a formation with a wave of his hand. Zaiyozi is the second. Just one, Liu Bei was surprised. How does he compare to Zaiyozi? Far surpasses him. The man with the feather fan smiled sadly. They're worlds apart, Daming, in an ordinary house, a man stood with his hands behind his back, gazing at the sky, shock on his face. To reach such terrifying heights without meticulous study. He's like a ghost, the Han Dynasty. Zhang Liang looked up at the sky, silent for a long time. Only the greatest strategists knew how to create formations without any tools. How terrifying was that? He surpassed almost every advisor in Kyushu. Including the bonus of Zaiyozi's strength, of course. After all, most counselors in Zhozhou were ordinary people. Though wise, they had no power. They knew Qin Dynasty, capable of using the power of the world.